nearly 384,000 kilometers from Earth, and nearly 53 years ago, in 1972, humans last set foot on its surface. And what happened after that is remarkable, and we never even tried to go back. But now in 2026, we're preparing to go to the moon again, and this time, not just to go, but to stay there, settle there, and even beyond that, to Mars. And this entire plan is called the Artemis mission, which is perhaps the most ambitious space program in human history. But the biggest question is, if we reached the moon in 1969, why haven't we gone back for 50 years? Is it really that difficult to get to the moon, or is there some other story behind it? Today we'll answer that question and understand what the Artemis mission is, how it works, and why it's so important for our future. First, let's go back a little. In the 1960s, a unique type of race was underway between the United States and the Soviet Union, which we call the space race. This was a time when both countries wanted to show each other who was technologically superior. The Soviet Union launched the first satellite, Sputnik. Then, it sent the first human into space, Yuri Gagarin, leaving the United States lagging behind. So in 1961, U.S. President John F. Kennedy made a bold announcement that before the end of the decade, we would land a man on the moon and bring him back safely. This was the beginning of the Apollo program. Now let's understand a little about the Apollo program, because without understanding it, it's difficult to understand Artemis. There were 17 missions in the Apollo program. Apollo 11 is the most famous, as it was during this mission that Neil Armstrong first set foot on the moon on July 20th, 1969. That day, the whole world sat in front of televisions, and Neil Armstrong uttered the name that people still remember. That's a small step for a man, but a giant leap for humanity. Astronauts subsequently went to the moon on Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, bringing the total number of humans to the lunar surface. However, after Apollo 17 in 1972, everything stopped, and we never returned. Hearing this, the question inevitably arises: why did the technology end? Did funding dry up, or did interest evaporate? The truth is, all three reasons are true. The main goal of the space race was to defeat the Soviet Union, and once America landed on the moon, that goal was accomplished. After that, public interest began to wane as people realized they had finally reached the moon. What more could they expect? As public interest waned, the government also reduced the budget. The Apollo program cost approximately $280 billion in today's money. A huge sum. Spending so much money without any immediate return was politically difficult. So essentially, the mission to the moon wasn't stopped, but its priority was reduced. But now, 50 years later, the scene has completely changed. Today, going to the moon is no longer just a race for one country. Instead, it has become the next step for all of humanity. And the biggest reason for this is that we now know that the moon is not just a sphere of stone, but rather contains something that could change the entire future of our space exploration. Water. Yes, you heard that right. There is water on the moon. But this water is not like the water on Earth. Rather, it is in the form of ice on the moon's south pole, in craters where sunlight never reaches. And this discovery is a game changer. Now, you might be wondering, what difference does finding water on the moon make? So let's understand this in a very simple way. Look, whenever we send something into space, what is the biggest expense? It's the weight. Earth's gravity is very strong, and sending anything into space requires a lot of fuel, and water is very heavy. 1 liter of water weighs 1 kilogram. If we're going on long missions into space, astronauts need water for drinking, for growing food, and most importantly, for fuel. Yes, water can be used to make fuel. The formula for water is H2O, meaning 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen. We can separate the hydrogen and oxygen by breaking it down through a process called electrolysis. Hydrogen is used as rocket fuel, and oxygen is used by astronauts for breathing. So, if water were found on the moon itself, we wouldn't need to transport so much water from Earth, significantly reducing the cost of missions. This is where the Artemis mission comes in. Artemis is NASA's program that will take humans back to the moon, and this time the goal isn't just to go there, but to establish a permanent presence there. The name Artemis comes from Greek mythology, where Artemis was the twin sister of Apollo. It was chosen because this year, for the first time, a woman and a person of color will walk on the moon. This means this mission isn't just about science. It's also a message that space exploration is for everyone. Now, to understand the Artemis program, let's divide it into 3 parts. The first is Artemis I, which was completed in 2022. The second is Artemis II, which is going to happen very soon. The third is Artemis III, in which humans will actually land on the lunar surface. Let's first talk about Artemis I. This mission launched in November 2022 and was an uncrewed mission, meaning there were no humans on board. The purpose of this mission was to test NASA's new rocket, SLS, and spacecraft, Orion. The full form of SLS stands for Space Launch System, and it is the most powerful rocket NASA has ever built. This rocket is even more powerful than the Saturn V, which was used in the Apollo missions. SLS stands 98 meters tall, about the height of a 30-story building, and its thrust, or 39.1 meganewtons, gives it the power to leave Earth. Now let's talk about the Orion spacecraft. Orion is the capsule that will carry astronauts to the moon. This capsule is larger than the Apollo capsule and can accommodate 4 astronauts. It features an advanced life support system, radiation protection, and can remain in space for up to 21 days without resupply. In Artemis I, Orion orbited the moon and returned safely to Earth 25 days later. This mission proved that both SLS and Orion work, and we are now ready to send humans. Now let's talk about Artemis II, the next big step. In this mission, for the first time, humans will orbit the moon aboard the Orion spacecraft. This mission will last approximately 10 days and will carry 4 astronauts. However, this mission will not involve a lunar landing. This is simply a test flight to see if humans can live safely aboard Orion. Among the astronauts selected for the Artemis II crew is a Canadian astronaut, as Canada is a partner in this mission. And then comes Orion 3, which is the most exciting mission. This mission will mark the first time in 50 years that humans will land on the lunar surface, and most importantly, this will be the first woman and the first person of color to land on the moon. But this mission isn't just about landing on the moon and planting a flag. This time, astronauts will travel to the lunar South Pole, where no human has ever been before. They will study water ice there, collect samples, and try to understand how a lunar base could be built. Now, here's an interesting thing that makes Artemis completely different from Apollo. Apollo had a single spacecraft that went to the moon, but Artemis will use a separate landing vehicle built by SpaceX called Starship. Yes, Elon Musk's company, SpaceX, is part of this mission. Starship is the world's largest and most powerful rocket ever built. Its height is 120 meters, and it is completely reusable. This means that once used, it can be used again. What will happen in Orion 3 is as follows. First, the SLS rocket will carry Orion into lunar orbit. Starship will already be waiting there, having been sent to lunar orbit in a separate launch. Then astronauts will transfer from Orion to Starship. Starship will take them to the lunar surface. They'll do their work there, and then Starship will bring them back into orbit, and finally Orion will bring them back to Earth. This is a very complex mission, but that's why it's being done step by step. Now, what's the actual plan after reaching the moon? Let's understand that. NASA plans to build a permanent base on the moon, called Artemis Base Camp. This base will be built on the moon's south pole, where there is water ice. This base will allow astronauts to live, conduct research, and prepare for longer missions. Not only will the base be built on the surface, but a space station called the Gateway will also be built in lunar orbit. The Gateway will be a small space station that will orbit the moon. It will be similar to the International Space Station, but smaller in size. Its function will be to serve as a stopover point for astronauts. This means that any mission to the moon will first stop at the Gateway and then proceed to the surface. And most importantly, the Gateway won't just belong to NASA. The European Space Agency, Japan, Canada, and several other countries are also partners. Now, the big question is, what's the benefit of all this? Building a base on the moon will cost billions of dollars. So, what's the return? And the answer is Mars. Yes, the real goal of going to the moon is to reach Mars. Look, Mars is very far from Earth. Even when Earth and Mars are closest to each other, the distance is about 55 million kilometers, and it takes about 7 to 9 months to reach there. Launching such a long mission directly from Earth is very difficult. But if we had a base on the moon, we could launch to Mars from there. The moon's gravity is 6 times less than Earth's. This means that launching from the moon would require much less fuel. And if there were a facility to produce fuel on the moon itself, traveling to Mars would be much easier and cheaper. So basically, the moon is a stepping stone to Mars. Now understand that living on the moon is not easy. There are many challenges that astronauts will have to face. The first challenge is temperature. Where the moon is exposed to sunlight, the temperature reaches 127 degrees Celsius, and where it is dark, it drops to minus 73 degrees Celsius. Surviving in such extreme temperatures is very difficult. The second challenge is radiation. There is no atmosphere on the moon to block solar radiation and cosmic rays. This radiation is very dangerous for humans and can cause diseases like cancer. The third challenge is dust. Moon dust is called regolith, and it is very fine and sharp. It penetrates spacesuits, damages machines, and can be inhaled into the lungs. Astronauts in the Apollo missions faced significant problems due to this dust. Another challenge is gravity. The moon's gravity is 6 times lower than Earth's. Prolonged exposure to low gravity weakens bones and reduces muscle mass. NASA and other agencies are working on solutions to all these challenges. Now let me tell you something interesting that you may not know. America isn't the only one in this race. China is also aggressively pursuing its moon program. In 2019, China landed its first lander on the far side of the moon, the part we never see from Earth, with the Chang'e 4 mission. Following this, Chang'e 5 brought back samples from the moon, and Chang'e 6 brought back samples from the far side, a first. China plans to send humans to the moon by 2030 and establish a base there. And China isn't doing this alone. Russia is in partnership with China, and together they are planning to build an international lunar research station. So basically, a new space race has begun, and this time the stakes are very high. and India is not far behind. ISRO made history in 2023 by soft landing on the moon's south pole with Chandrayaan-3. India became the fourth country to soft land on the moon and the first to land on the South Pole. This was a significant achievement because landing on the South Pole is much more difficult than on the North Pole. The terrain there is rough, there are craters, and communication is difficult. But ISRO did it, and the whole world took notice. Now, ISRO is working on the Gaganyaan mission, which will send Indian astronauts into space for the first time. After that, ISRO plans to collaborate with NASA to go to the moon. NASA and ISRO have an agreement to send Indian astronauts to the International Space Station, and in the future, India may also participate in the Artemis mission. Now think about why all this is important. We have so many problems on Earth: climate change, poverty, and wars. So what's the point of spending billions of dollars on space? And that's a valid question, but it also has an answer. Look, when we conducted the Apollo missions, many technologies were developed that we use every day today. The memory foam in your mattress was developed by NASA for spacesuits. The water purifier technology you find in your home was developed for space missions. Scratch-resistant lenses, cordless tools, freeze-dried food, insulation materials, all of these are the result of space research. So money spent on space isn't wasted. It creates new technologies, new jobs, and boosts the economy. Every dollar spent on the Apollo program returned $7 to $1 to the economy. And most importantly, it's human nature to explore. We left Africa and spread across the world. We've crossed oceans, climbed mountains, and discovered new islands. And now there's nothing left to explore on Earth. The next step is space. There's the moon, Mars, and beyond that, the entire universe. If we want to survive as a species, we'll have to be beyond Earth. Because one day an asteroid could hit, a supervolcano could erupt, or anything could happen. And if we're just on Earth, our entire civilization could be wiped out. But if we become a multiplied species, our survival is guaranteed. And the Artemis missions are the first major step in that direction. So that's the whole story of Artemis. In 1969, we set foot on the moon and then forgot about it for 50 years. But now we're going back, and this time not just to go,